Our second speaker is code 152. The title of her presentation, Boys, Hooters, and Why Cooties is the Next Plague.
I have this vivid memory as a kid. I was at my neighbor's first grade birthday party. It was at Hooters, and I was running away from this boy who was chasing me because obviously he had cooties. As I dashed in between the waitresses and tables, I remembered what my father had always taught me. Boys are nothing more than infectious germs trying to ruin your life. My 7-year-old brain immediately went into panic mode, thinking that I'd be infected with his disgusting germs and I'd be doomed to spend my life stricken with cooties. As kids, we are only taught that germs are passed from the opposite gender, infecting us on purpose. But in reality, this is our first understanding as to what germs actually are. According to kidshealth.org, germs are invaders of our bodies that make themselves comfortable and settle down for a long stay. Kind of like boys. So, to satisfy our younger selves and further understand what germs actually are, we must first understand the history of germs, then look at the problems we are facing today, before finally understanding the new ways we're learning to combat disease. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I got really excited over this whole visual aid rule in info. Obviously, I missed the memo on the giant poster boards, but 2 rules caught my attention. I can't bring in anything that's alive, and I can't inflict any bodily harm on any of you. Well, unfortunately for all of you, I'm about to break both of them. This is a germ. Specifically, it's mono. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, that's not alive, she's not breaking any rules. But thanks to the work of Louis Pasteur, often regarded as the godfather of germ theory, not to be confused with James Brown, the godfather of soul, we know that if I took this big germ and looked at it under a microscope, we would see millions and millions of tiny microorganisms. So I actually did bring in something that's alive. Take that, NSDA. The second rule I'm breaking, however, requires us to go a little more in depth. Who wants me to give them mono? Okay, we'll talk later. I'm just gonna just put you right there for now. According to the National Center for Biotechnological Information, there are 4 main kinds of germs: bacteria, virus, protozoa, and fungi. While we now know that these 4 kinds of germs were the earliest cause of disease, humans haven't always been so correct. Historian Tim Lambert writes that ancient Egyptians believed that demons and spells cause disease, and they must be vomited out, while Medical News Today reports that people living in medieval Europe thought that Satan and other demonic spirits caused disease. And while it's kind of funny to look at these silly old people, as reported by the book The Ghost Map, it wasn't until the Broad Street London cholera epidemic of 1854 that people realized germs could be spread through foul drinking water. Just 6 years after that, Pasteur was creating his germ theory, learning that one of the most important effects of germs was their ability to cause disease. I'm here to give a little PSA that these bad boys are alive and well, and there are more of them living in your mouth than there are people in this world. And yet, I would have no issue intensely checking out Chris Hemsworth's mouth. You know, if I were all of you, I would be careful. I brought in 11.5 million germs on that thing, and any one of them can get you sick. Boom, rule violation number 2. I mean, come on, it's obvious what germs are capable of doing. We've all eaten at Chipotle. Going back to the 4 main kinds of germs, protozoa isn't very common in the United States. And while fungus can turn your toenails green, some medications are even made from it, including the wonder drug penicillin. Viruses, like the flu, can be prevented with a vaccine. And others that have historically killed millions, like smallpox, are now extinct because of vaccinations. Thanks, vaccines. But sometimes it can take a while for a workable vaccine to be created, which is why people were so scared of Ebola, and why the New York Times of May 31st, 2016 said that the World Health Organization advised to move or postpone the Rio Olympic Games for fear that the Zika virus could wreak havoc on the world with so many people exposed. While we're fighting viruses on the front end, before they even touch us with vaccines, these do nothing for bacteria, which means we have to try and cure them after the person has been infected. According to Group Health's Janie Garris, bacteria used to be fairly easy to get rid of. One common example is streptococcal pharyngitis, better known as strep throat. Normally, your doctor would just prescribe you with some antibiotics, and within a matter of days, it's like it never even happened. So if we have all of these cures and ways to prevent disease, why are we still getting sick? Well, in an article published by the LA Times in January 2010, it explains that our over-reliance on antibiotics is creating superbugs, or bugs that don't respond to any kinds of medication. This creates the scary concept of bacterial immunity, which would mean everyday diseases like strep could become incurable. And it's getting worse. Today, there are about 700,000 deaths caused annually by bacterial infections. By the year 2050, that number could reach 10 million. An article published by The Economist in May 2016 says it's the old diseases, not the new ones, that should be feared. Drug-resistant versions of the organism Staphylococcus aureus, a common bacteria found in hospitals, is making elective surgeries more and more dangerous. This means things like hip replacements and vasectomies could soon carry lethal risk. So, since we're all about to be taken down by that little guy, it seems that we should all bathe ourselves and our purple friend in hand sanitizer every day, right? Wrong. And kind of gross. One way our bodies fights off bad bacteria is through the good bacteria that we have in our digestive tracts, called gut flora. Dr. David Williams explains, our first inoculation of good gut bacteria occurs when our eyes, nose, lips, and mouth slide through our mother's birth canal. I didn't want to say that sentence any more than you wanted to hear it. This transfer of flora plants the seed for the initial colonies that begin to populate. More and more babies are being deprived of this initial inoculation thanks to the rising cesarean section rates. In 1965, when C-section rates were first measured in this country, it accounted for just 4.5% of all births. Then, in 44 years, C-section rates rose 29.5%, depriving millions of babies of the healthy gut bacteria that keeps us free from disease. It's not all bad, though. One way doctors are learning to combat this is through fecal transplants, like feces. And yeah, it's exactly what you think it is, poop. When a person suffers from a gastrointestinal infection, the common treatment is antibiotics. However, that can sometimes kill off the good bacteria too. With fecal transplants, healthy gut bacteria is introduced to the infected colon through a colonoscopy. Although it sounds really gross, 90% of all patients report to be cured, with no significant side effects reported to date. I would also like to add, when researching a topic as sensitive as fecal transplants, never click on the Images tab. You can't unsee that. And there are even more ways to cure disease. Researchers at Oregon State University and other institutions say that bacteria's new worst enemy might be a peptide-conjugated phosphorodiamidate morpholino oligomer, or as doctors call it for short, peptide-conjugated phosphorodiamidate morpholino oligomer. I'm pretty sure they say these things just to sound smart. These are lab-synthesized strands of DNA and RNA that go after specific biological targets. This takes out the threat of creating antibiotic resistance completely. And it works even better than the previous medications used. You know, personally, I would rather have this than getting somebody else's poop put into my body, but that's just me. Germs are all around us. And if we were to believe the researchers at Georgia University, who appear to have too much time on their hands, that number reaches 5 million trillion. That's a lot of zeros. By going over the history of germs, the problems we're facing today, and the new cures we're finding, we were able to see that germs aren't meant to be universally feared or loved. Our relationship with these little guys in the future not only determines our individual health, but the success as a human race. Whether or not they're causing or protecting us from the Zika virus, germs will always be around. Anthropologist Spencer Wells writes, if you go back far enough, our genome connects us to germs butterflies and barracudas. And it's this connection that makes understanding germs so important. So, hopefully next time you're in a situation involving germs, you choose to embrace the bacteria, kiss Chris Hemsworth, and run towards that boy, just as long as he's cute.